Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Overcoming Your Trauma course. And in today's presentation, we're going to be talking about what causes trauma. What are the leading causes of trauma? Well, one of the biggest things is childhood abuse. This is probably the number one thing. And as children, we are very impressionable. We can be controlled very easily. We are very heavily influenced by the world around us. So whenever anything bad happens to us, we will be greatly impacted by us as it shapes the rest of our future. So childhood abuse, it can range from a variety of different things. This can be physical abuse. Perhaps your parents were very physically abusive to you. They scolded you in ways that were very, very, very bad. They could even go as so far as to, beating you, hitting you. And it goes beyond just, the usual just childhood discipline. We're talking about, very, very deep physical abuse. They can even get to the point where there is emotional and psychological abuse, which this is very manipulative tactics that parents and adults will use to control the child. Because, as I said, the child is very impressionable. They're very easily controlled by other people. They're very heavily influenced by other people. So because of that, often parents and other people who want to control the child will manipulate them. They will often even gaslight them. And they can also abandon them as well. Imagine if you had someone that you were very close to, or like your mother or your father even, they just weren't really there for you. And you pretty much had to raise yourself. That is a type of psychological abandonment. Because what they have done to you is that they neglected you. They weren't there for you. They weren't there to give you praise. And perhaps any time you did anything good or that you were proud of, they always shunned you for it. They're manipulating you and they're controlling you, and that does shape the rest of your future. And then lastly, there is also sexual abuse, which tends to be probably some of the worst abuse that can happen, especially when you are very, very young. And this can come in all forms, essentially. With sexual abuse can be done by your own parents, they can be done by a relative, they can be done by other people around you, and it greatly impacts your life to such a degree that it almost seems impossible to be able to heal from it. There's also sudden tragic events that can cause trauma. These are often things that are out of your control, that happen in nature even, or just things that are happening around you. And these can be things such as natural disasters. This can happen at any time in your life. You don't have to be a child, although when you are a child, it will definitely be more traumatic to you. But you could be an adult and this ends up happening where you lose your entire house. Either due to a fire, there could be some sort of storm or hurricane, a flood, anything along those lines. Or even war is another tragic event that can end up happening. If you're in the middle of a war and perhaps some of your home gets blown up and you have to leave, leaving you with absolutely nothing. Perhaps you have a family that was killed during the war. That's also a tragic event, especially even if you saw it firsthand. Not to mention also if you were actively in a war, if you were a soldier fighting on the lines, then that causes severe trauma because you are killing other people. And in that moment, you're not really thinking about it, but once you're done with it all, it will come back to haunt you. Now, there's also a difference between situational and chronic trauma. Situational trauma is from a recent event that goes away after a short time. So these will be things that perhaps there is a passing of a loved one, that you deal with the emotions of grief, sadness, and you feel maybe even anger because maybe you couldn't help them or anything along those lines. And then chronic will be long-term trauma that affects many aspects of your life. This will often be the type of trauma that is caused by childhood abuse or things that just continue to linger even to this day. Even if you're not being traumatized now, it still lingers many, many, many years later. And the unfortunate truth is that situational can become chronic. because all trauma initially, it will start out as situational. If an event happens as a one-off, then it's going to be situational. But the moment you continue to dwell on it and let it affect you, that is when it starts to become chronic. Or if you're a child and situational trauma ends up happening, it is much more likely that it would develop into chronic trauma, which can be severely impacting a lot of the areas of your life. So you really have to know what the type of trauma you have is in order to deal with it. Because if you're dealing with situational trauma, it is much easier to be able to tackle that. Because if you give yourself enough time to heal and to overcome the problems, if you go to even like a therapist, kind of talk about, what is impacting you, you will often get better in a short period of time. Whereas chronic trauma, there's going to be a lot of things that you may not be aware of that ended up happening. So if you really drill down to figure out what the type of trauma it is that you have, then you'll be able to address it much more effectively. Situational will often resolve itself. This is very true, because it will often go away over time. So as we mentioned, if there is someone who has passed away that was close to you, it hurts you very deeply. It is like a traumatic event because maybe you lost your best friend. Maybe you lost your mother or your grandmother or your grandfather, your father, a sister, a cousin, a brother, whatever else, a family member that was really close to you, a friend that was really close to you. And it is traumatizing because you feel lost without them. You feel as though there's nothing that you can talk with anyone about, because perhaps they were someone that you could really talk with. That's a very, very difficult thing to be able to deal with. But if you give yourself enough time to go through the emotions, it will naturally go away over time. You'll be able to heal from that. But if it is very, very deep, it can become chronic. And what you need to do is you need to be able to address and remedy that quickly. So if you're dealing with some sort of trauma and it is situational, then it is important that you address it as quickly as possible to be able to not let it become chronic. Because the moment you begin to continue to obsess over it, that you let it control your life, that's all you're thinking about, over time it will become chronic. And you could even repress those memories, repress those emotions and thoughts that you have, as it then begins to infect and control a lot of the other aspects of your life. Chronic requires more work. This is something that has been with you for a very long time. So in order for you to remedy it, there's often years of therapy that you have to go through in order for you to properly come to terms with the trauma and overcome it. Often this has to do with addressing the conflicts from the past. If there is trauma from your past, from your childhood, that you may not even be aware of, that you have completely blocked out because it's too difficult for you to face. These are all things that are subconsciously on your mind. They're deep within your mind, and they are still controlling your life. But they have to come to a head. They have to be addressed. They have to come out, and you have to face them. Then what you have to do is you have to identify self-hatred. You will often hate yourself because of trauma that has happened. And if this is the result of the trauma, that you have this hatred towards yourself, then what you need to do is address that hatred. Because when you continue to hate yourself, you would not be able to succeed with what you truly want to do in this life. Because you will continue to doubt yourself, you will continue to have hatred towards yourself, and you will continue to feel as though you are not worthy. And then lastly, you have to be able to overcome the resistance. With chronic trauma, with you blocking out everything, that is a form of resistance, because the mind naturally wants to heal. The mind has a natural capability of healing itself. It can overcome any challenge as long as you are able to let it do its job. But the problem is our ego, our subconscious mind, it blocks it all out. It completely prevents us from being able to overcome the trauma, because We don't want to tackle the problem. We don't want to face those negative emotions. We don't want to admit even that we have a problem. But we have to be able to do that if we want to overcome it. So the next thing we'll be talking about is your first steps. What are the first steps that you need to take in order to overcome your trauma?